Your book has obviously gotten so much notoriety, so much attention, and it goes into a lot of the gritty details of Tiger's kind of collapse and what has happened. You got pushback from Tiger's lawyers. They tried to discredit your reporting. Did you expect that to happen?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's basically, 101 with Mark Steinberg and Glenn Greenspan is that you just have to expect that they're going to say something. It's kind of a cut and paste press release they sent out. And they could have sent it, 3 or 4 different times over the course of Tiger's career to other people that have attempted to do what they really don't want anybody to do, which is to explain who Tiger Woods is. And I'll deal with just a couple specifics. First of all, they said it was a rehash of everything that's been written before. And if this book is anything based on 3 years of research and reporting, it's not a rehash, and that you don't have to listen to me. You can just go look at the reviews. And the second thing is that, again, it's sort of so predictable, that it was, quote unquote, littered with egregious errors. And that's just not true. I mean, it's just, 404-page book, of which there are tens of thousands of facts in it. There were less than a handful that either were typographical errors or they literally were down to DA, the point where they were saying, well, we called it the Masters rather than Masters Tournament, its formal name every single time we mentioned it. So, it's kind of laughable. It's insulting in a lot of ways, given everything that Jeff and I have done as journalists for them to lash out the way they did. But frankly, that's what they do because they would rather shoot the messenger than really deal with the message, which is in the book. And they just don't want to deal with that because the reporting is too strong and it's too vivid.
Well, the message throughout the book is that Tiger really was disrespectful to a lot of people and felt superior to just about everybody, and essentially was dismissive of everybody in his life and used them until he started to collapse. And one of those guys was Bill Clinton. And you have an anecdote in this where they play golf together. And essentially, I mean, Tiger kind of blows off the ex-president. Was that shocking to those around the president and maybe to the ex-president himself?
No, without question. I mean, President Clinton went out of his way to go out to California to be the guest of honor of the opening of the Learning Center for Tiger back in 2006, and was at without any pay or anything, and all he asked was to play a round of golf, with Tiger, and there were 4 other people in that fivesome, including some very powerful names that you'll recognize. Arn Tellem, one of the biggest sports agents in the business. Casey Wasserman, the son of the legendary Hollywood mogul Lou Wasserman, who is now the head of the L.A. Olympic Committee. Doug Band, who was a longtime counselor to President Clinton and Tiger himself. And, there's, again, there was some controversy over what happened during that long day on the golf course. But, I'm not in the position of writing something about how difficult Tiger was that day. Obnoxious would probably be the better word, without having a firsthand account of what happened. And I had a firsthand account from one person in that fivesome, and it just was so typical of Tiger. And again, you have to put these things in perspective. This is 2006, and his dad is on his deathbed. Tiger's in the midst of, multiple affairs with various women. He's not a very good person at that point in time in his life. And he was somebody that President Clinton said, or the person that I talked to said that the president was really put off by Tiger's attitude that day, being on the phone all the time, walking off the green prior to people finishing putting, just things that are just not done certainly in that kind of setting. So, but just to go back for a second, I mean, the book is really 2 things. It answers the question, who is Tiger Woods? And yes, at times in his life, was he an absolute jerk to people? Without question. But what the book does that no other book has ever done is by the time you get to that kind of Tiger Woods, you understand how he got there, how he was raised by Earl and Cotita, his mom, programmed really to change the game of golf. And, you know, you're taking a journey with him as he transcends the game and changes the game and is overwhelmed with extreme fame and fortune, and then becomes a very difficult person to deal with. I believe he's not that person today. I believe he's changed considerably in the last year or so.
Armen Keteyian joins us, co-author of the book Tiger Woods. So let's talk about Earl Woods, because so much of the stories that you tell is about how he was molded by Earl Woods, and Earl was his idol. Earl pushed him, trained him, almost demanded that he becomes the greatest golfer of all time, and he does. But Earl is also a womanizer. Earl also has a sex addiction. Earl also kind of shows disrespect to others or using others for what he wants. When you look at Tiger as a fully formed man and all of his flaws, do you look at Earl Woods and say, well, that's pretty good parenting because he helped create the greatest golfer ever? Or, and that's pretty bad parenting because even though he was a great golfer, the guy really was a terrible dude?
Well, that's the dichotomy, and that's the yin and the yang of Tiger Woods' life. And you know, the other driving force for us, DA, was, you know, what's the price of genius? What is the personal cost to Tiger Woods to be a transcendent figure in the game of golf? And Earl was he was a complicated man, much like his son, and in many ways there would be no Tiger Woods if it wasn't for Earl. He brought the great passion that Tiger has for the game. Much of the creative genius was, I think, formed on the golf course at the Navy Golf Course in Cyprus in rounds of golf that Earl and Tiger would play together. Certainly Tiger's great work ethic was a result of Earl's belief that, you know, practice, you know, makes perfect. But the other side of that, which is sort of the Shakespearean drama to the book, is that all comes with a price. And the price is a distrust of the media, a sense of loneliness, a kid who was very awkward and socially malformed as he was growing older, and really incapable of dealing with the avalanche of fame and fortune that fell in his direction. And that's not to say that anybody else would have been able to sustain it, but I think it is better to say that there would have been more human kindness and more appreciation and more of the qualities that make an actual human being during that period of time if it hadn't been for Earl. And then just briefly, on the other side, you have Tita, his mom, who is the other half of this equation, because they're both there in forming Tiger, and she's the one that brings the killer instinct and the indomitable will and the cold-blooded assassin to the table with Tiger. And so that combination, that programming that Tiger went through, we saw the result of it on Sunday. We saw and were awed by what we saw at the Masters or at the U.S. Open in 2008. But when the lights were off and he went home, it was a very, very different person.
Chuck Klosterman is one of my favorite authors, and he pointed out that he thought one of the most interesting parts about your book was defining the sex addiction that kind of consumed Tiger, and that it comes from a lot of different places, from development, growing up. When you delved into this, what was the core of that drove Tiger to all of the mistresses and all of those conquerings and all of that stuff, which ended up falling on top of him? What was the emotional center point that I guess motivated him to go down that road?
That's an interesting question. It's something that was my work to the point where my wife was beginning to wonder, just how much time I was spending with some of these sex addiction experts. She's like, "You're going again to talk to him again?" And
yeah.
But it turns out, and it's pretty easy to understand. It all traces back to the family dynamic, and it's whether it's an addiction to sex or it's an addiction to drugs or alcohol or gambling or something else. It's a form of pain relief, And it's not about the sex for Tiger or anybody else. And it's not just me saying that. It's people that have been through the Gentle Path Gratitude Program and people like Dr. Monica Meyer, who now runs the Gentle Path Program at the Meadows out in Arizona, a disciple of Dr. Patrick Carnes, who's, really the founding father of sex addiction treatment in the world. And it's really, that's what it traces back to. It's a form of pain relief, and it's really not about the women as much as it is trying to try to dull your senses. And I think what Tiger experienced at the Pine Grove facility in Mississippi was an extraordinary 6 weeks of his life, because you really can't run away from your mothers and fathers and your family upbringing. But the difference was there is people go in there and it's private. Tiger, it became like much of the rest of the scandal, a very public part of his epic fall from grace. So you have to factor that in there as well, because nobody in modern, certainly in the world of celebrities, I mean, even Bill Cosby or O.J. Simpson or even politicians like Anthony Weiner or John Edwards, no one has experienced the public humiliation that Tiger did.
Armen Keteyian, co-author of the book Tiger Woods. Is he numbing the pain physically, literal pain because his body's breaking down, or is he numbing the pain of a dysfunctional development?
It's the emotional pain that you're numbing out. I mean, Tiger certainly was having some physical problems, as we all know. I mean, he wins the U.S. Open in 2008 against Rocco Mediate on a broken leg and without an ACL in his left knee. I mean, I don't even, to this day, that may be the single greatest sporting feat in the last 25 years from the physical standpoint, and the fact that he had to go 91 holes in order to win it. But I think far more when you're dealing with sex addiction is you're dealing with the emotional trauma. And frankly, think about it. I mean, he grows up an only child in a house in Cypress, California that's 1,474 square feet. They're essentially living on top of each other. And there is very little for Tiger outside of mom and dad. He doesn't have a lot of childhood friends. And those that he does befriend, certainly fall in love with, and in terms of his first girlfriend, Dina Gravel, it's heartbreaking in the book. She's basically just ripped out of his arms by his parents because she's seen as an obstacle on the march to Tiger turning pro, at Stanford. So, there's some just heartbreaking moments in this book, but I think what really makes it work is when they happen, and they happen in a linear fashion, you understand them because you're living through Tiger's eyes in a lot of ways in this book.
Only got about a minute and a half to go, so I want to finish up with this question. When you look at the fall of Tiger, do you think it's because simply physically he couldn't get it done anymore? Or do you think that the air of supremacy that he had was ripped away when all of his behind-the-scenes stuff and skeletons get laid out bare and he gets publicly humiliated? What's the biggest reason for the downfall?
Well, that's really interesting, because I think if you look at 2009, where he is living, his life is running at about 200 miles an hour. He's seeing 4 different women at the same time, including Rachel Yucatel, and that's the beginning of the end of his marriage. He still wins 5 tournaments on the PGA Tour. He wins the Australian Masters just really the week before the National Enquirer breaks the story about his infidelity. In a weird way, I think it fueled Tiger's compartmentalization, fueled his greatness on the golf course, and I think he did break for a while mentally. We watched all the chip yips and the problems, physically, but there was an emotional breakdown as well. And I think now, after what he went through last Memorial Day, the DUI, the rock bottom, he's come out a different person. He's come out more human, and it's not me saying, it's people on tour saying it, and he's easy to root for now because maybe the machine is gone, but the human being has replaced him, and he's still got, I believe, he's got enough in him to win golf tournaments.
the biography that has all of these anecdotes and is as well researched as any biography of any major American sports idol that you'll ever read, co-authored by Jeff Benedict and Armen Keteyian, two of the best in the business, is called Tiger Woods. It's gotten a lot of attention, New York Times bestseller, and really, really interesting stuff. Armen, I'm so glad that we could catch up, man, and talk about this book. As always, you're always welcome around here, man. I appreciate it, and congratulations on all the success.
Yeah, you too. Congratulations. Thanks a lot.
You got it, bud.